The rain had stopped only minutes earlier when I saw her collapse beside the marble steps of the office building, one hand gripping the railing and the other pressed against her injured ankle. She was the woman everyone in the company feared, respected, and secretly admired, Seraphina Vale, the widowed CEO who could silence an entire boardroom with a single look. Yet that afternoon, beneath the pale warmth of the midday sun, she looked nothing like the powerful executive from the glass tower above us. She looked exhausted, frightened, and heartbreakingly alone. I ran toward her without thinking. When I reached her, she tried to stand, but the moment her foot touched the ground, pain crossed her face. I told her not to move, but she insisted she could manage. She couldn't. So I carefully lifted her into my arms and carried her toward the company car waiting at the curb. Her fingers tightened around my shoulder, and for several seconds neither of us spoke. Then, so quietly that I almost thought the traffic had swallowed her words, she whispered, "I've missed this." Those 4 words would change both our lives. Before we continue, if you believe that kindness can give someone a second chance when life has taken almost everything from them, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Epic Story Hub. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories like this to you. Now, let me take you back to where everything began. My name is Callum Reed, and until that afternoon, I had always considered myself invisible. I worked as an operations coordinator at Vale Meridian, a position important enough to keep me busy but unimportant enough that nobody remembered my name outside my department. I wasn't wealthy, handsome in the way magazines described handsome men, or connected to powerful people. I simply showed up, worked hard, and went home. My life had become predictable after years of trying to rebuild it from mistakes I didn't like remembering. Seraphina Vale belonged to a completely different world. She had taken over her husband's company after his unexpected death and transformed it from a struggling regional firm into one of the fastest-growing businesses in the city. People called her brilliant, ruthless, impossible to impress, and emotionally untouchable. I had never heard anyone call her lonely. That morning, I noticed something strange about her. It was a bright weekday, the kind of afternoon when sunlight spilled through the enormous windows of the headquarters and turned the polished floors almost golden. Seraphina had spent the morning in meetings, moving from one crisis to another without stopping for lunch. When she finally came downstairs, she wasn't surrounded by assistants or security. She carried a folder beneath one arm and looked distracted. Near the entrance, a delivery worker had accidentally left a thin trail of rainwater across the marble. Seraphina stepped over it safely, but as she reached the final step, her heel slipped. Her ankle twisted beneath her, and she fell hard enough to make everyone nearby gasp. I was the closest person. I still remember the expression in her eyes when I reached her. It wasn't anger. It wasn't embarrassment. It was the expression of someone desperately trying not to let anyone see how much pain she was in. She told me she was fine, but her trembling hands betrayed her. I knelt beside her and asked where it hurt. She pointed to her ankle, and I noticed the swelling already beginning. When the company doctor arrived, he recommended that she rest at home and avoid putting weight on it. Her driver had been delayed, and her assistant was stuck across town. Seraphina looked toward the crowded street and sighed. She seemed ready to force herself into a taxi. I couldn't let her. I told her I would help her get home. She stared at me as though I had just suggested something completely unreasonable. Then she asked whether I was always this stubborn. I smiled and told her only when someone was pretending they weren't hurt. For the first time, I saw the smallest smile appear on her face. It disappeared almost immediately, but I saw it. When I lifted her, she stiffened at first. She seemed uncomfortable being dependent on someone. But after a few seconds, her head rested gently against my shoulder. I carried her through the bright lobby, past employees who suddenly became very interested in their phones and paperwork. Nobody said a word. Outside, the afternoon air was warm, and the clouds had begun breaking apart after the earlier rain. I placed her carefully into the car, and she looked at me with an expression I couldn't understand. Her home was a beautiful house surrounded by tall trees and white stone walls, but it didn't feel like a home. It felt like a museum. Everything was perfectly arranged, perfectly clean, and strangely silent. There were photographs everywhere, but most of them showed Seraphina standing beside her late husband, Callum Vale. He had been a charismatic man with an easy smile. In every photograph, Seraphina looked happy. As I helped her onto the sofa, I noticed her gaze lingering on one particular picture. It showed the two of them on a beach, laughing beneath a bright summer sky. She quickly looked away. I wanted to leave, but she asked me to stay until the doctor arrived. So I stayed. The doctor eventually confirmed that she had a severe sprain but no fracture. He left instructions and promised to return the next morning. Once the door closed behind him, silence filled the room again. Seraphina looked down at her ankle and then toward the photographs. She told me that people thought being strong meant never needing anyone. After her husband died, everyone expected her to become stronger, so she did. She worked longer hours, made harder decisions, stopped accepting invitations, and learned how to smile when she felt like breaking. But somewhere along the way, she had forgotten what it felt like to simply let another person take care of her. I told her that needing help didn't make her weak. She looked at me for a long moment and asked whether I believed that because I truly believed it or because I felt sorry for her. I told her I didn't feel sorry for her. I respected her. But I also thought she had spent too many years convincing everyone that she didn't deserve tenderness. Her eyes became glossy, and she turned toward the window. That was when I finally understood the meaning of the words she had whispered in the car. I've missed this. She hadn't necessarily meant being carried. She had missed feeling safe enough to let someone care. Over the next several days, something unexpected happened. I became the person assigned to handle the work she couldn't physically manage while recovering. I brought documents to her house, organized meetings, and helped her stay connected with the office. At first, our conversations were professional. Then they became personal. She told me about the dreams she had abandoned after her husband's death. She had once wanted to paint, travel, and spend mornings reading in quiet cafes. Instead, grief had convinced her that moving forward meant leaving the past behind. I told her that perhaps moving forward didn't mean forgetting Callum. Maybe it meant allowing herself to live again without feeling guilty for it. One afternoon, sunlight poured through the windows as she sat on the terrace with her injured foot elevated. She asked me what I wanted from life. I told her I wanted something simple, a home that felt peaceful, people I could trust, and someone who wouldn't make me feel like I had to earn their affection. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. Then she admitted that she had started looking forward to my visits more than she wanted to admit. She said the house had been silent for years, but somehow my footsteps in the hallway had begun making it feel alive again. I knew there was a risk in allowing our connection to grow. She was my CEO. I was her employee. She was a wealthy widow carrying years of grief, while I was simply a man who had stumbled into her life at the exact moment she needed help. But what began as kindness slowly became something deeper, not rushed, not dramatic, but honest. We started taking short walks when her ankle improved. We drank coffee in the garden during warm afternoons. She laughed more. I noticed she stopped wearing the expression that had made the entire company afraid of her. And one day, she stood beside the photograph of Callum and finally told me she wasn't betraying him by being happy. She was honoring the life he had wanted her to live. Months later, Seraphina returned to the office without the emotional armor everyone had become accustomed to seeing. She remained a brilliant CEO, but she became more patient, more human, and strangely happier. As for me, I eventually accepted a position in another division so that our relationship would never depend on an employee and CEO arrangement. We didn't know exactly where life would take us, but for the first time, neither of us was afraid of finding out. One sunny afternoon, nearly a year after the day she injured her ankle, we returned to the same marble steps where everything had begun. Seraphina looked at me, smiled, and deliberately stepped over the place where she had fallen. Then she slipped her hand into mine. She told me that sometimes life breaks something simply to force us to stop running long enough to notice what truly matters. I reminded her that she had been the one who fell that day. She smiled and said that perhaps we had both been falling for a long time, we just hadn't realized it. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes that love can arrive after loss, and subscribe to Epic Story Hub for more stories about hope, kindness, and second chances. Sometimes the smallest act of compassion can become the beginning of someone's greatest chapter. And before we end, I want to ask you something special. Comment "second chances" below if you believe no one should have to face their darkest days alone. Your comment may remind someone reading it that their story isn't over yet. Because sometimes, the person you think you're helping is actually the person who helps you heal. Sometimes carrying someone through a moment of pain isn't about strength at all. It's about reminding them that they don't have to carry everything by themselves. Seraphina thought she had lost the right to happiness when she lost the man she loved. I thought I was destined to live an ordinary, invisible life. But on one ordinary afternoon, beneath the warm daylight and after a simple accident, two lonely people discovered something neither of them had expected. A second chance doesn't always arrive with a grand announcement. Sometimes, it arrives quietly, in the form of two arms willing to carry you when you can no longer stand on your own.